She had the ticket, the credentials, the confirmed seat, but when the Michelle Obama walked onto that plane, Karoline Leavitt was told to move. No warning, no respect, just raw political bias. What happened next wasn't just a seating dispute. It was a national scandal that exposed everything wrong with political favoritism in America. If you believe in fairness, dignity, and standing your ground when the system tries to silence you, hit that subscribe button now, because this is the kind of story the mainstream won't tell. And it all began with one woman who refused to give up her seat and exposed the truth at 30,000 feet. It was just past 6:15 a.m. when Karoline Leavitt arrived at Reagan National Airport. The skies were overcast, and a light drizzle coated the glass panels of the terminal. Most travelers were still shaking off the fog of early morning, gripping half-finished coffees and trying not to make eye contact with one another. But for Karoline, this wasn't just another flight. It was the beginning of a very public day. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit and carrying a slim leather briefcase, she looked every inch the poised White House press secretary she had become known to be. Not flashy, not boastful, just sharp, prepared, and entirely on task. She was headed to a national media conference in New York City, where she was scheduled to speak on the role of political truth in a divided America. The topic wasn't just close to her heart, it was the very battlefield she stood on every day. And like any responsible professional, she'd selected seat 2A on Patriot Air's first-class cabin, not for the view, not for the perks, but for the quiet space it offered to revise her speech, respond to sensitive communications, and prepare for a gauntlet of questions awaiting her in Manhattan. That morning, she wasn't thinking about confrontation. She was thinking about clarity. But America had other plans for her. Patriot Air was the pride of elite domestic travel. Their first-class cabin resembled a high-end hotel lounge more than the inside of an aircraft. Hot towels, fold-flat beds, crystal glasses, and exclusivity. The airline had built its brand on prestige and politics, becoming the unspoken favorite of lawmakers and federal contractors. What most Americans didn't know is that Patriot Air was also bidding on a multi-million-dollar federal transportation contract, one Karoline had a role in reviewing. She reached her gate early and was among the first aboard. The crew recognized her, smiled politely, and welcomed her aboard. She settled into 2A, the seat closest to the front left window, tucked her bag beneath the seat, adjusted her blazer, and opened her tablet. Just then, a low murmur rippled through the gate area. A private car had pulled up directly to the plane. Someone important had arrived. Flight attendant Emily Carter walked quickly past Karoline toward the open cabin door. Her smile had stiffened. Her walk had changed. And a moment later, Michelle Obama stepped aboard. Yes, the Michelle Obama. The former First Lady was dressed impeccably in a designer coat, her presence commanding the kind of attention that turned whispers into silence. She smiled lightly at passengers as she entered, nodding but saying nothing. No greetings, no demands. Just a composed figure used to being treated as someone the rules do not apply to. Passengers stirred, someone gasped, others began murmuring. That's Michelle Obama. She always takes 2A. Of course she's flying Patriot Air. This is going to be interesting. A few rows back, a man in a gray suit leaned forward and pulled out his phone. Another passenger, an activist type wearing a Protect Democracy hoodie, smirked and whispered just loud enough to be heard. She shouldn't have to ask for the seat. They should just know. Emily Carter walked briskly back toward Karoline, her body language shifting with each step. Ma'am, she began, tone overly formal, but condescendingly polite. There seems to be a seating issue. We'll need to ask you to move to another available seat. Karoline looked up, blinking once. Excuse me? She said, calmly but firmly. This is my confirmed seat. I'm a platinum member. Booked it directly. I checked in on time. Emily's smile faltered. She lowered her voice slightly. We understand, ma'am, but a very high-profile guest just boarded, and we try to prioritize certain passengers. And I don't qualify as a high-profile passenger? Karoline asked, tone even, eyebrows slightly raised. Emily hesitated. We're trying to ensure a smooth experience for everyone. By removing someone who followed the rules? Emily glanced toward the front of the plane where Michelle Obama had paused by the galley. She wasn't saying anything, but her presence did all the talking. Karoline retrieved her member card from her briefcase and handed it over. This seat is mine. Unless you've got a new policy written since I boarded, I'll stay here. The tension in the cabin spiked. Other first-class passengers turned to look. Phones began to discreetly film. A woman across the aisle leaned to her husband and muttered, "She's one of them, a Trump girl." A soft murmur followed. Not loud, but unmistakably political. Karoline knew the look. She'd seen it 1,000 times in D.C., the polite mask of inclusion covering a deep well of judgment. Then came David Lawson. David, the cabin supervisor, was a tall man in his 50s with a silver badge and the air of someone who enjoyed control more than customer service. He walked with authority, but as he approached Karoline, his eyes flashed briefly with unease. "Ma'am," he said curtly, "this is not a debate. We are asking you to change seats." Karoline didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "And I'm respectfully declining. I'm not obstructing the flight. I'm not causing a scene. I'm just occupying the seat I paid for." The cameras caught it all. David exhaled through his nose, turned, and marched to the cockpit. Karoline returned to her tablet. But the battle had just begun. 5 minutes later, the cockpit door opened. Out stepped Captain Michael Bennett. He looked experienced, level-headed, a man who'd seen his fair share of mid-air emergencies and political passengers. But today would be a new kind of turbulence. He stood before Karoline. "Ma'am," he said, voice professional but unyielding, "the crew has the authority to reassign seats to ensure comfort for all guests. We're asking you to move." Karoline paused, then looked directly at him. "Captain, I respect your authority for in-flight safety, but I'm not breaking any rules. I'm seated in my confirmed paid-for seat as a platinum member." "This will be your final warning," he said, his voice lowering. "Please move, or we'll have to call airport security." Passengers gasped. Karoline opened her phone, tapped record. "I want to be clear," she said, her voice calm, but cutting through the cabin like a knife. "I'm being asked to give up my seat for a higher-profile passenger. I have not violated any airline policy. I am not causing a disruption, and I am recording this to protect my rights." David's face flushed red. Emily looked down. Michelle Obama remained silent. Security was called, and within minutes, 2 officers boarded the aircraft. The moment they approached Karoline, the cameras began flashing. But Karoline didn't shrink. She rose slowly, collected her things, and, before stepping into the aisle, looked at Captain Bennett and said quietly, "You're making a mistake." Then she walked off that plane without a single tear, without a single raised voice, with the poise of someone who knew how this would play out. Outside the jetway, she pulled out her phone and made the call that would change everything. Karoline stood at the edge of the gate terminal, her breath steady as she watched the Patriot airplane taxi away from the jet bridge. Her phone pressed gently to her ear. She spoke not with panic, but with precision. "Sarah, it's me. Get the press team ready. I need full video documentation, timestamps, statements from witnesses, everything. They tried to remove me quietly. Now they'll answer publicly." On the other end of the line, Sarah Mitchell, her longtime aide and media strategist, didn't need to ask for details. She'd seen this before. She knew Karoline's tone, and when that calm, quiet fury entered her voice, it meant one thing. Someone had made a political mistake, and this time, they made it on camera. By the time Karoline reached the VIP lounge to wait for the next flight, the first video had already gone live. Shot by a passenger 2 rows back, it showed the confrontation in all its sharp, unfair edges. The still frame that began to spread across social media was simple. Karoline, sitting composed in seat 2A, facing 3 uniformed airline staff, with Michelle Obama standing quietly in the aisle nearby. The internet noticed, and it didn't take long for the story to explode. Shar Seatgate, Shar Karoline kicked out, and Darjar VIP bias began trending nationally. At first, the narrative was mixed. Liberal influencers defended the crew's discretionary authority. Progressive commentators called Karoline a professional victim. But as more footage emerged, particularly the clip of a fellow passenger whispering, "She's a Trump person, just move her," the story changed. It wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about bias, power, and punishment. The camera didn't lie, and Karoline had all the receipts. A young woman named Eliza Martin, who had been seated across the aisle, approached Karoline in the lounge. Her hands trembled as she held out her phone. "Miss Leavitt," she said, eyes watery with emotion, "I recorded everything. From the moment they asked you to move to when you walked off, and I left the flight myself. I couldn't stay. It didn't feel right. Karoline stood and took the phone gently. Thank you, she said. You have no idea how important this is. As the video file transferred, Eliza added, that wasn't customer service. That was political bullying. Meanwhile, back on the plane, whispers continued. Michelle Obama had taken seat 2A. A flight attendant discreetly offered her a glass of complimentary champagne, voice low and reverent. We're so sorry for the disruption, Mrs. Obama. We want to make your flight perfect. She nodded politely, saying little, but not once did she ask that Karoline be removed. The implication was enough. In the galley, out of earshot from the passengers, David Lawson turned to Emily Carter. Thanks to her, he whispered, gesturing toward a woman who had praised the airline's actions earlier, we're gonna get a ton of good press. She promised to boost us on social. They thought they'd won. They had no idea the backlash they were about to unleash. At Patriot Air's Glass Tower headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, the executive suite was quiet until CEO Robert Harrison's phone rang. Sir, this is Laura in public relations, came a breathless voice. We've got a problem. Handle it, Robert replied, half listening. No, sir, Laura interrupted. You need to see the video. This isn't just a social media flare-up. The passenger we removed, that was Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary. Robert sat up, his coffee forgotten. Send it to me now. Within minutes, he was watching the footage in stunned silence. The grainy camera clip showed Karoline calmly presenting her credentials, the crew's stilted explanations, the passenger promising online praise in exchange for preferential treatment of Michelle Obama, and finally, Karoline's quiet defiance. I'm not moving. The silence in the room after the video ended was crushing. We just pulled a senior government official off a plane, Robert whispered, on camera, during an election year, while negotiating a federal contract. He knew what that meant. Patriot Air was in free fall, and it hadn't even hit the news cycle yet. Back in the lounge, Karoline's team had set up a mobile command center. Sarah Mitchell scrolled rapidly through news alerts. Daily Wire just picked it up, Newsmax too, and The Blaze. Tucker might mention it tonight. Karoline remained calm, tapping out a message on her phone. Statement ready? She asked. Sarah nodded, drafted and approved. Karoline looked up, her tone precise. Let's make one thing clear. We don't lead with outrage. We lead with facts, bias, injustice, silence in the face of discrimination. That's the story. Let the public decide what they saw. She took a sip of water. Her heart was pounding, but her face betrayed nothing. Also, she added, start calling federal transportation liaisons. They need to hear from me before they hear from Twitter. By noon, the firestorm had officially ignited. The White House declined to comment. Michelle Obama's team issued a brief statement. Mrs. Obama was unaware of any seating conflict and did not request special treatment. But it was too late. The court of public opinion had convened. And older Americans, especially those who had seen enough to know bias when they saw it, were flooding comment sections. Reminds me of how they treated veterans after Cuba, one user wrote. My granddaughter flew with Patriot. Same thing happened to her. No media, no justice. It's not about the seat, it's about dignity. Cable news began covering it. On one network, an anchor read aloud Karoline's now viral closing line as she walked off the plane. You're making a mistake. The host paused. It sounds like she meant every word. And she did. That evening, Karoline received a call from Robert Harrison himself. Miss Leavitt, he began, his voice tight. We want to apologize. Karoline interrupted, measured and professional. You had every opportunity to do the right thing at the right time. Now it's too late for apologies. I'm requesting a formal meeting with your board. There was silence on the line. And just so you're aware, she added, your company is being reviewed by my office for upcoming federal transportation approvals. Consider this your opportunity to show you take accountability seriously. She hung up and smiled, because for once, it wouldn't be swept under the rug. Not this time. It started as a quiet ripple, but within hours, it became a tsunami. The video of Karoline Leavitt being asked, no, forced, to give up her seat for Michelle Obama had already racked up nearly 2.5 million views by the following morning. The moment she said, I'm not moving, with the unshakable dignity of a woman who'd been underestimated too many times, had become a viral rallying cry. Major news outlets, from Fox News to independent conservative media, were airing the video on loop. Memes flooded social media. Headlines read, "Political discrimination at 30,000 feet," "Airline bias goes too far," and "Who really gets to fly first class in America?" What had begun as a corporate blunder now looked dangerously like a violation of constitutional values. And for millions of older Americans watching from home, many of them veterans, retirees, and lifelong patriots, it hit a nerve. "She paid for that seat. She had the right to be there," said Walter Jenkins, a retired Navy pilot from Texas, during a live call-in segment. "This is the America I served for, where you get removed for your political beliefs?" Church groups, VFW halls, local news stations. Everywhere Karoline went, the story followed, and people responded. Meanwhile, in the heart of Arlington, Patriot Air's HQ had become a war room. CEO Robert Harrison was pacing in his office, his phone buzzing nonstop with messages from board members, government liaisons, and legal advisors. On the wall-mounted screen, a finance analyst summarized the latest blow. "Our stock's down 18% since market open. We're trending for a 30% dive if this isn't contained." Robert turned to Laura Evans, the airline's public relations director. "Damage control, now." Laura shook her head. "We tried, but this isn't a PR storm anymore. This is a credibility collapse." In the corner, the general counsel cleared his throat. "And if she brings a lawsuit, we're talking millions, plus the federal contract. We may be disqualified." Robert stared at the live ticker. Patriot Air wasn't just bleeding, it was spiraling. Back in Washington, Karoline sat calmly in a private office just 2 blocks from the Capitol. The room was buzzing, laptops open, screens filled with media alerts and legal strategy briefs. Sarah Mitchell entered with a thick folder. "We've compiled over 300 written testimonials. Veterans, nurses, teachers. People saying this reminds them of the same disrespect they faced after standing up for what they believed in." Karoline nodded. "Good. Get 5 of those stories approved for release. We're not just telling my story. We're showing they're not alone." She turned to the room. "I want every voter in America who's been told they don't matter to see that this seat wasn't about luxury. It was about respect." Meanwhile, whistleblowers from Patriot Air started coming forward. A former flight coordinator anonymously told a journalist, "We've always been told to accommodate celebrities and political figures, but we knew exactly who Karoline was." The crew made a judgment call based on pressure from liberal passengers. Another former employee went public saying, "We were trained to never escalate with federal officials, especially those tied to contracts. That policy was ignored here. I think someone wanted a pat on the back from the media." These revelations poured gasoline on the fire. By Friday evening, a leaked internal email surfaced, showing David Lawson referencing Michelle Obama by name as the reason for the seat change, before Karoline was even asked to move. That detail shattered the last defenses of Patriot's PR strategy. But behind closed doors, another conversation was taking place. Michelle Obama had remained publicly silent, but privately, she wasn't unaware. According to an anonymous source from her security detail, the former First Lady watched the viral footage alone the night it broke. She didn't say much, the source shared, but she did shake her head and said, "That's not how I wanted that handled." Later, she reportedly reached out to a mutual contact in Karoline's circle, not to apologize, but to acknowledge. "Mrs. Obama knows political tension," the source added. "She didn't ask for special treatment, but she also didn't intervene. And she knows silence carries weight. The moment may have passed on the plane, but the consequences of that silence had only just begun." At Fox News, a special panel was assembled. Former judges, retired generals, and journalists dissected the situation. One said, "It doesn't matter whether Michelle Obama asked for the seat or not. The issue is, once again, the system bent over backward for the elite and punished a law-abiding American." Another panelist, a Vietnam vet, added, "Karoline didn't yell. She didn't resist. She stood her ground with dignity. And they called her the problem?" The clip went viral, and for the first time in years, older Americans felt like someone in Washington had stood up for them. Saturday morning, Robert Harrison called an emergency board meeting. The mood was tense. Several directors hadn't even had time to change out of their weekend clothes. Some joined via Zoom, visibly angry. "We've lost credibility in the public," one board member said bluntly. "And unless we take real action, now, we may never get it back." Robert sighed. "I agree. I've scheduled a personal meeting with Karoline Leavitt. Full transparency. Full apology." "And the crew?" asked another. He paused. "Suspended pending review." There was a long silence. Then someone said, "It's a start, but it better be enough." That afternoon, Karoline arrived at Patriot Air headquarters. Not with a media entourage, not with protesters, just her team, her lawyer, and her unshakable poise. The receptionist, eyes wide, whispered, "That's her." Inside the boardroom, the mood shifted when she entered. Robert Harrison stood. "Miss Leavitt, thank you for coming. Karoline raised a hand. "Before we begin, I want it on record that I'm here not because I want a personal apology, but because your company's culture has to change." Robert nodded solemnly. "Understood." "Seo." A large screen lit up. It played the full video, her calm refusal, the whispered bias, the crew's silence, the passengers' smug promise to promote the airline. When it ended, no one spoke. Karoline broke the silence. "I have two demands," she said. "First, an internal review with full accountability, publicly, names, consequences. Second, a structural change, policy, training, transparency, or this video will be the first of many." Robert swallowed hard. "We'll begin immediately." She nodded. "Then you'll get your chance to earn back trust." Outside the building, press cameras waited. Karoline stepped up to a microphone. "I wasn't removed from that seat because of a misunderstanding. I was removed because I represent a side of America that some people wish didn't exist." She looked out at the crowd, the older faces nodding in agreement. "But we do exist, and we won't be pushed aside. Not in the skies, not in the courts, not in this country." Applause broke out, and from that moment, the narrative changed. This wasn't about Karoline anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. By Sunday morning, what began as a single seating dispute had grown into a full-blown corporate crisis and an ideological firestorm. Patriot Air's CEO, Robert Harrison, was no longer just trying to contain bad press. Now, he was answering to shareholders, federal contractors, and a nation divided. Emails poured in by the thousands. Letters from veterans groups, petitions signed by airline customers and political watchdogs alike. A major airline union released a public statement condemning bias in crew decision-making while quietly distancing itself from David Lawson and Emily Carter. Even airline competitors were starting to hint at customer-first campaigns, clearly aiming to poach Patriot Air's high-value clients. The company's share price had dropped 33% in less than 3 days. But for Karoline Leavitt, the real pressure wasn't in the financial markets. It was in the halls of power. Karoline sat down for a closed-door meeting with two senior members of Congress Monday morning. One of them, a Vietnam vet turned lawmaker, handed her a file folder containing nearly 1,200 statements from constituents across the country. "I haven't seen this much outrage over a flight since the post-9/11 profiling complaints," he said, his tone grim. Karoline nodded. "It's not just about travel. It's about the quiet discrimination older Americans feel every time they're told to sit down, shut up, or step aside." "People see themselves in what happened to you," said the second representative. "You stood your ground. That's rare these days." Karoline didn't smile. It shouldn't be. Back at Patriot Air headquarters, Robert Harrison stared blankly at a framed photo on his wall, a commemorative picture of the company's first flight. A symbol of trust, pride, progress. Now, it looked like a relic. He turned to Laura Evans, his PR chief. "Cancel the damage control campaign." "Sir?" she asked, startled. "We're past spin. This has to be real, from the top down." Later that afternoon, Robert appeared on live television. Sweating slightly under the lights, he looked into the camera and addressed the nation. "To Miss Leavitt, and to every American who felt disrespected by what happened on our flight, we failed you. We prioritized celebrity over character, appearances over policy, and for that, we apologize." He paused. "We've begun immediate terminations of the staff involved, but that's not enough. So, beginning this week, Patriot Air will suspend all flights for 48 hours to retrain our staff. From executives to baggage handlers, no one is exempt." Social media erupted. In a hotel conference room in D.C., Karoline watched the announcement with her team. Sarah Mitchell leaned over. "That's more than I expected." Karoline said nothing for a long time. Then, "We just made history." The public reaction was swift and emotional. Retired teachers wrote in. Church pastors recorded video messages of support. Older Americans flooded the airline's phone lines, not just with complaints, but with memories of their own silent humiliations, of being told they were inconvenient, outdated, disposable. The media latched onto a new headline. The 48-hour pause, Patriots' national reckoning. Besorsta, for the first time in its corporate history, Patriot Air grounded all flights. And inside those grounded gates, a revolution was beginning. Employees were gathered into regional training centers. Videos from the incident were dissected frame by frame. Legal consultants explained constitutional protections and anti-discrimination laws. Veterans gave testimony about being marginalized despite their service. And in select cities, Karoline Leavitt herself showed up. She didn't come with cameras, no social media posts, no publicists. Just a printed copy of the boarding pass she never got to use. In one unforgettable session, she stood before a group of Patriot Air flight attendants. "I didn't come here to make you feel guilty," she began. "I came here to ask one question. What would you have done if I were your grandmother?" The room was silent. She continued. "Would you have asked her to move without explanation? Would you have let strangers label her as less deserving because of who she voted for? Would you have stood by while she was walked off that plane without even raising a hand?" A flight attendant in the back, a woman named Gloria, 58 years old, mother of 3, stood up slowly. "No," she said, voice cracking. "I wouldn't have." Karoline nodded. "Then don't let it happen again. Not to me. Not to anyone." The training sessions grew in intensity. Employees cried. Some walked out. Others wrote apologies. Handwritten letters delivered straight to Karoline's office. David Lawson's name became shorthand for failure, a cautionary tale told in HR departments nationwide. Emily Carter, reportedly distraught, had resigned quietly and moved back in with family in Kentucky. A former coworker said she hadn't stopped crying since the video aired. As for Captain Michael Bennett, he released a public statement of his own. "I failed in my duties as a leader. I should have stopped it. I should have said no. And I will carry that regret for the rest of my life." By the end of the 48-hour pause, something extraordinary had taken place. Patriot Air emerged, not unscathed, but changed. A new policy was printed on every ticket. All passengers, regardless of status, background, or belief, will be treated with equal dignity. And beneath it, in small print, "If you feel this has not been honored, record it, report it, and we will listen." Karoline returned to the skies a week later. Same airline, same city, same destination. But this time, when she arrived at the gate, a quiet hush fell over the boarding area. A gate agent stepped forward. "Miss Leavitt," she said gently, "your seat is ready, and so is this country." Passengers stood up. Some clapped. One elderly man in a WWPSUFU veteran cap saluted. Karoline didn't wave, didn't smile for the cameras. She just walked down the jet bridge and took her seat, 2A, where she belonged. When Karoline sat back in seat 2A, a quiet stillness settled around her, not the silence of fear, but of reverence. For the first time in weeks, she closed her eyes, not to shut out the world, but to reflect on everything that had changed since the last time she occupied that exact seat. Behind her, the whispers were different now. That's her, the woman who didn't back down. She stood up for all of us. And somewhere in the back of the plane, a woman quietly murmured, "I hope my granddaughter sees this one day." What had started as a seating dispute had become a symbol, a spark that lit the dry timber of resentment older Americans had carried quietly for decades. Patriot Air had apologized, trained their staff, rewritten policy, But the culture shift had only just begun. By the end of the month, over 40 corporations across multiple industries requested access to Patriot Air's internal training model. Several state legislatures cited the incident in new consumer protection proposals, aiming to ensure political neutrality in service-based industries. A think tank in Washington, D.C. released a paper titled Bias, Belonging, and Boarding Passes, a Case Study in Corporate Responsibility. Karoline was invited to speak at universities, veteran forums, and even a Senate subcommittee hearing on freedom of expression and consumer rights. But she wasn't interested in becoming a celebrity. "I didn't want a spotlight," she said during a speech at the Heritage Forum. "I wanted a seat, and so do millions of Americans who are tired of being overlooked." The crowd erupted in applause, but not all reactions were supportive. Some liberal commentators accused her of leveraging victimhood for political capital. A few corporate spokespeople warned that her case was being politicized. Michelle Obama's camp, while still publicly silent, was reportedly uncomfortable with how far the story had evolved. But Karoline never returned fire. Her team issued no counterattacks. Her tone remained the same, calm, factual, firm, because she knew the truth was enough. In the months that followed, she launched an initiative called Seat for Every Citizen, a nonpartisan watchdog group committed to monitoring bias in service sectors. They helped veterans, single mothers, and elderly travelers file complaints when unfairly treated. They even built an app where passengers could anonymously report politically motivated discrimination in airports and airlines. Her inbox began filling with stories. A Vietnam veteran forced to surrender his seat to a younger tech executive because the crew thought he would be more understanding. An older woman refused boarding because her conservative bumper stickers made another passenger uncomfortable. A retired schoolteacher shamed in first class for flying on her husband's money, despite booking the ticket herself. The stories were painful, and they were familiar. So Karoline didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She began to fight. At the one-year anniversary of the Patriot Air incident, Karoline stood once again before an audience, not in a courtroom or studio, but in a community church in Missouri. It was a veterans event, modest, humble, folding chairs, American flags, home-baked pies. She spoke not from a podium, but from the floor. "I didn't expect to be the face of anything," she said. "But maybe that's the point. They didn't expect me to stand my ground either. They didn't expect you to care, but here we are." She looked out at the room, at the quiet nods, the tearful eyes. "This movement isn't mine. It's yours." The following week, Patriot Air CEO Robert Harrison invited Karoline to a private roundtable to discuss long-term policy reform. He shook her hand and said, "You changed everything, and for once, I think it's for the better." Karoline didn't answer with words. She simply opened a folder and handed him a list of proposed standards for industry-wide bias prevention. It was bold, it was clear, and it was non-negotiable. To his credit, Robert didn't push back. He just said, "Let's get to work." Karoline's story became more than a viral video. It became a line in the sand. In every small town, every big city, there are people who feel invisible, who wonder if the country they love still sees them, still respects them, still values their dignity. What happened on that flight didn't just expose a corporate mistake. It exposed a cultural sickness, one that tells people they're too old, too conservative, too inconvenient to matter. But one woman didn't flinch, didn't move. She stayed in her seat. And because she stayed, America stood up. So to every viewer, every grandmother who's been overlooked, every veteran dismissed, every quiet voice that was told to stay silent, this is your story too. If you believe dignity doesn't expire with age, if you believe fairness has no political party, if you believe that standing firm in truth is the highest form of courage, then share this story. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because justice doesn't go viral on its own. It needs you. Thank you for standing with Karoline, and thank you for standing up for America.